Cheers, everybody. We are live with Albert, and I'm going to say your name, and I don't normally say the last name, but Nerenberg because it's easy.
I'm glad to hear it's easy. Like, it's the first time I've ever heard that. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
as a person from Saskatchewan, I do not have a lot of cultural diversity here, so
Okay.
sometimes last names are hard to figure out, if that makes any sense, or at least I didn't growing up. Albert, let's start off real simple. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to introduce yourself, and then we'll go into the actual talk because you can introduce yourself way better than I ever can.
Sure. I would say this joke. I say, I am the greatest hypnotist that ever lived. But no, I should say I'm an accidental hypnotist, which is, I think, interesting because I think some people are like, they want to be hypnotists. When they're young, that's their goal. It was never my goal. I became a hypnotist quite in a way by accident. I was a documentary filmmaker, journalist, and I had a lot of trauma. And I particularly had one trauma that was quite severe. I won't explain it because it takes a little too long, and I just saw an ad online for, the ad read something like, do you have obsessive memories you can't get rid of? Call this number. And I don't normally call numbers, but I did. And this guy ran a hypnotic protocol on me, and it fixed me in 20 minutes, something that I had for a long time. So after that, I thought, I should learn how to do this. This is powerful. I didn't even know what hypnosis was really. So I trained. And what was interesting, I think maybe what's relevant is that I started to realize that hypnosis is an area, hypnotherapy too, where there are so many exciting new frontiers. There's so many things that are not understood, not known, that I then was able to sort of jump into these sort of vast areas of how do you explain this? What accounts for that? And so I did a bunch of TEDx's, there's been a bunch of talks where I demonstrated phenomena in hypnosis that kind of blew up. TEDx that went big, a couple TEDx's that went big. And I also demonstrated that I think drug states and alcohol states can be replicated with trance. And so I'm really interested in the more sort of outlandish, cutting edge, unusual aspects of hypnotic phenomena. And that's where I've kind of gone in my stage hypnosis world.
That makes sense. So I don't know if you know about Gerald Kine, but he talked about, in one of his trainings, he talks about training people who are working in ambulances to do anesthesia with hypnosis in the ambulance when like an amputation had happened. And there is evidence from some of the wars that they've used it in wars. And I find that bloody amazing that you could take, for the people that watch, don't cut off your arms. That's stupid. But there is a hypnotic state where you can have enough analgesia that you can cut off a person's arm, or you could take out a tooth, like dental hypnosis. And I think that being able to control your body state with hypnosis is amazing. It's almost like a Wim Hof jump in a river, or whoever the guy that jumps in the river is. But it's amazing what we can actually do. And I want to talk to you specifically. There's an overhanging thing to this. You're going to be talking at the Performing Hypnosis Summit, but there's something more important that I want to talk to you about, and we're going to get sexy today, everybody. We're going to get real sexy. You have a documentary coming out specifically for orgasm hypnosis. Now, taboo subject, but let's talk about it.
Definitely totally taboo subject, and for good reason. I think that the reasons it's taboo, there's a very simple reason. If you're a hypnotherapist and you want to build the trust of your clients, you don't want to be saying, oh, by the way, I can hypnotize you to have orgasms, or that's what I do during the day, because these things need to be kept very separate. That ethically you don't mess around with, there is a form of maybe a sexual hypnosis that might be healing and therapeutic, but it's a very structured game that you're getting into, and you don't. So I understand. So hypnotists are often nervous to either say that they've done this kind of thing or that it's possible, even because they want to make it clear that they are ethical and that they don't introduce content that is sexual when it's inappropriate. So yeah, that's why it's taboo. That's one of the reasons. I mean, the other reason is I think it's totally misunderstood. I have the luck to be able to do research on it, and it's kind of mind-blowing. I think that what I'm discovering is, if you look at what hypnotherapy is, a simple explanation might be, hypnotherapy allows us to get into the essential programming codes of behavior and hopefully change them or work on them in a healing and positive way. Well, what sexual hypnosis might do is something very similar for sexual behavior. And what's interesting is most people feel like I don't want to say have no control, but most people probably feel like they don't understand their sexual behavior and they don't really have any access to it. They just, they kind of do what they do, or they feel what they feel. And this suggests that change is possible and positive change is possible, one. And two, that sexuality is a probably wilder and more adventurous phenomena than most of us experience. One example is in standard sexual behavior, it takes 14 minutes scientifically, there's studies to show this, that to bring someone to a state of orgasm. And but in hypnosis, you can do it in under a minute. I demonstrate in the film, and it's even shorter than that. So how could that be? How could that be? How can it be like, officially the science says this is how long it takes, and then you're like, oh, hold on a second, just give me 30 seconds. And
it's almost like our mind controls our body in ways that we don't understand.
Actually, this is where you were going in the beginning of this conversation. Anesthesia, control of blood flow. I could name probably 10 areas of hypnosis that are mysterious. And I don't know anybody who's doing research, because I actually have looked at who's doing research. So one would be, you're right, anesthesia. And the other would be altered states. Yep. Why are we giving people drugs if we can replicate the states in trance? Another one would be the death trance, the theory that when animals die or when people die, they enter a trance state. There's so much, and
there's the weird one to bring up is the spiritual stuff.
Yeah.
And there is I don't know what your stance is, because we haven't had a big conversation on this, but I do a very motivational thing at the very end of my show. And I've had people tell me that they've got messages from the dead at the end of my show, which that's, sorry for swearing, but that's fucking mind blowing. And could they be crazy? Possibly. But if it's real for them, it's real. That's the thing that most people don't realize about hypnosis. If it's real for you, then it's real. And I haven't ever explored it because I'm a very corporate oriented guy. I do a lot of corporate shows. And if you explore certain things, that affects your business in other ways. Have you experienced that by doing the orgasm hypnosis and doing the drug style hypnosis where people feel that?
Totally. So you say, are you talking about me where you're not able to do corporate stuff, or is it more?
Yeah, well, where you're sometimes looked down upon by certain.
I think we know exactly why. I mean, if you're booking corporate events, you want it to go well, and you kind of have. How do you figure out who is safe? Well, you could ask them, but if it looks like they do racy stuff late at night, then maybe they're not going to be safe. And I have said, I felt, even making this film, I felt like this is going to hurt my business, but I'm okay with it. I sort of feel like it's actually a real measure of the significance of the film, in my opinion. I feel the subject is so important and so meaningful and potentially revolutionary that it needs to be made. Somebody's got to make this film. A lot of people have been sitting on it. I think meaning people known about these things for a long time, but nobody's said anything. So I was just like, I think the way to do it is to set it up journalistically so it's clear with balanced points of view, and then explain it with the science as well. So yeah, it definitely, there's lots of racy areas of hypnosis that you can go into that will hurt your business. But I also think that if you're honest and also, a decent human being, people can see that as well. And they can see, like, I still get corporate gigs, and often the corporate gigs I get is because I am interesting.
Okay. So this begs a question. When you were putting the whole documentary together, there are some people that have come before you, like Wendy Friesen, and Justin Trance used to have a TV show on Playboy. There's Steve G. Jones. I think he did the orgasm stuff. Who were you?
Salish.
Salish? Okay. So did you contact any of them to figure out the process of this? How did it work?
So the film sort of has a fairly clear arc about whether or not, first of all, whether it's real or not, because I think in the the general public. See, what to me is that the reality of film is that you've got to have tight focus. You can't run off and chase every angle.
Yeah.
So the tight focus of this is that the public doesn't know about this. Meaning, I mean, my experience was I would go to shows, and at the end of the show, the performer would say, "And now we're going to do hypnotic orgasm," or and so I remember, first of all, that it's like shocking and amazing, and two, that the audience would be like either falling out of their chairs, but then they would kind of like forget amnesia. They'd forget it happened, or they just didn't care about, like, I was there going, well, is this real or is this theater? And that question turns out to be very important, because if it's theater, then it's just like, oh, well, that's a funny thing to do and that's a funny act. But if it's real, it has a completely different significance. And so I haven't chased all the hypnotic sexuality people because it wasn't the exact purview of the film.
That makes sense. It brings up a dicey question, because if it is real and a stage hypnotist like me or you is doing a show, I don't do these types of shows, but if one of us does one of these shows and they're having actual orgasms on stage, what does that say about what we're doing with them? Do we have permission to actually do that with them?
Well, right. No, you're dead right. That's a huge question. And in fact, it's now being talked about. I mean, the late, great Jim Kellner is in the documentary talking about this exact thing. And he says, I mean, I think there was a time when people didn't ask for consent. They just did it. They just like, here's another crazy thing to do. And I think the view was that it's kind of theatrical and fun. And so, it's not really an issue. But now there's a recognition that you need consent. And that's a tricky thing, because I think there might be some people who don't care, but there might be some people who do. So the right answer is yes, you should get consent. And so now I think what people do is they usually kind of stop the show, and they may wake people up. But you know what hasn't happened? There's actually a need for discussion about the correct protocol, because there's some debate about, if you're in the middle of a hypnosis show where you've fractionated people a lot and they're in very deep and they're already fairly, going along with things, and then you just say, okay, now you're awake and you're no longer in trance. Do I have your permission?
You're the same brain power there. Sorry, I apologize.
No, I know.
Finish your sentence.
There's a question about whether they're fully back, whether they're fully capable of making that call. And so there's a question about whether it is, how do you get consent? And this is actually something that should be talked about at Performing Hypnosis. Maybe it will, but it was not the subject of my talk, but it's definitely something that people should be talking about, so that, I don't think in my view that if an ethical stage hypnotist has you experience a hypnotic orgasm and didn't really ask your permission, I don't think usually that's the worst experience, but we don't know, because some people, I've learned on this film, don't have the same association with orgasms that other people have. People, some for their own reasons, have negative associations with them, and they're, they have a right to. So it's not the kind of friendly, peaceful thing it might be to other people.
Yeah. For me, it's just a permission question. And I don't know how a person would get permission to do that beforehand. I know that, like, I do my pre-talk. It's called so many different things in this business, but a pre-talk, it's when you go up and you talk for 5 minutes and then you bring people up. During my pre-talk these days, because of the political landscape we're in, I actually outline my whole show. I say, we're going to go to the beach, we're going to get cold, we're going to drive a car, we might see an alien, we'll play a banjo, and we'll watch a movie. That's what's going on. And people are like, well, how is that funny? But that's an hour and a half of skits if you lay it out. And when I do that, I don't think I could say, and you might have an orgasm thrown in there, and that be viewed in a good way. Does that make sense at all?
Absolutely, yeah. And understandably, yeah. You can't. I mean, well, I think it's possible to get permission. I think you could, and you're probably right. It should be at the beginning of the show,
It would have to be.
I know that whenever I do this work, I always ask for consent and make it really clear and tell people a little bit what they might expect. And then that's usually how it plays out. But I think that this is a discussion that needs to be had. And it's a tricky thing, but it is solvable. The solution is give people the information, let them know, and ask for their consent.
Yeah. So this leads right into the talk that you're doing, the idiot effect.
Yeah.
What is the idiot effect all about? Because we only talked for like 15 seconds about the idiot effect.
Yeah.
I wanted to keep it fresh. Let's talk about the idiot effect.
So I started to notice. So when I'm doing stage hypnosis, I want to say something that's not. This is one of these questions that you can't answer automatically. Meaning, I'd like to say there's a quick solution, but there may not be. But I started noticing when you're doing stage hypnosis that a lot of the biggest laughs, or not necessarily, but a lot of the laughs revolve around kind of making a fool out of somebody. So either somebody's forgotten their name. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're foolish, because amnesia could happen to any of us. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't make you a fool, but the kind of slide of it is, look, the guy doesn't even know his own name, and then you turn somebody into a chicken. I actually think that a lot of this is beautiful and harmless, but the slide of it often is that we're making fools out of people. And we kind of, a lot of the humor is the person doesn't know what's going on. They don't know what's happening. They don't know that they're a chicken. Yeah. They're disoriented. They may be confused. And I started thinking, for the people involved, sometimes I wonder how they feel afterwards. Like, people are rolling in the aisles because you were a chicken for 10 minutes, and then you don't remember exactly what happened, and then you come back. And so I started to wonder, are there alternatives? And I did an experiment in a show where we tried this interesting reversal, where instead of sort of like focusing on making fools out of people, we elevated them. So we had people who we said, this is funny though too, because we said, you are the king of this country, or you're the queen of this country. And they would get all puffy and high status, and because they're in trance, and they would really feel it. And then the slide there was that they would enjoy it, but they would enjoy that. Sometimes people would laugh because we know, like, wait, you're not really the king, but you think you are. So it's like the same joke in a way. Mm-hmm. But I've started to can realize there are a number of ways that you can have elevating aspects of your show. So let me give you an example. There's a very successful stage hypnosis show called, what's it called now? Is it Hypno Show? I've forgotten what it's called for some reason. But there's a show out of Las Vegas where a stage hypnotist working with improvisers, comic improvisers like Colin Mockery.
Hip-prov,
that's it. That's right. I forgot it. Hip-prov. Thank you. So hip-prov, it's elevating for the simple reason they take random people out of the audience, and then they hypnotize them, and they discover. Now we know the mechanism. Most likely, the mechanism is the loss of inhibition. Yeah. That you tend to dramatically lose inhibition when you go into trance. So because they're less inhibited, they're more inclined to be an actor, joke around, horse around, do funny things. Sure. So, and then I went to a hip-prov show, and I was struck by, there were a couple people that were just so good. They were like, suddenly I was like, these people must be professional actors. I went up to them after the show, and I said, there's one woman in particular was so good. She played like a film noir detective. She played a femme fatale really well. I said, you must be an actress. And she said, no, never acted a day in my life. I'm a farmer. It's like I ran working in a farm. So that gave me an idea to see that you elevate people without, and it's still funny. It's still crazy. It's still zany, but they don't necessarily, the slide is not, you don't know what's going on. Though I don't necessarily see that as detrimental, but sometimes it is. So I started looking at another example is the thing I do, the hypnotic bar, where again, we're not so much like look, you don't know what's going on. It's more, you're in an altered state. What does it feel like? explore the many aspects of your own consciousness. It's not this. You're not making you look like an idiot.
Yeah. I get it.
Now, the only thing I want to add to this is that I really don't, with other stage hypnotists, I don't want to make it seem like I'm preaching, because I'm not saying, hey, you guys make people look like idiots, and I don't. Like, I do a lot of the same things that other stage hypnotists do, and I'm interested because they're interesting, like making people forget their name, or getting people to dance, or loss of inhibition. Those are all turning. I used to say, I will never turn people into chickens, and then I started doing it because I'm fascinated by the science of how people become chickens. So I'm not here to condemn other stage hypnotists. I'm more exploring the challenges of thinking that there might be other ways to do it.
So this brings up a lot of questions for me. When I first started, Penn and Teller were really, really popular. And Penn was talking about magic and how most magicians just want to make people look like idiots. Because that sounds really, those aren't his words, but it's making your person that you're doing the magic trick for look like an idiot when you're in front of a crowd. And that's not what I was ever about. So I always focused my show, and I have focused my show on a motivational comedy hypnosis show. Now, what does that mean? It means that it's motivational in nature. It doesn't mean that it's preachy, but it is motivational. I do a completely clean show. And I, at the end of the show, always say, if you're embarrassed, please come talk to me after the show. I need to know why you're embarrassed. And I get the feedback. And now a lot of people will say, well, Jesse, your show isn't all fancy. It's not a Las Vegas style show. It's not a whatever. But you know what it is? It doesn't piss off the people. It doesn't piss off the booker so that I don't get booked again. And that's because I'm taking care of my volunteers. That's something that's missing in a lot of trainings that hypnotists do, is that you need to understand you have to take care of people. And it's not just the ab reaction thing. It's the whole wellness. If you bring Sally up and she's the HR manager at the company, you ain't coming back next year if you do something bad with her. So that's why I keep everything clean. It might sound like I'm preaching now, but that's my business, and I feel it's the business of a lot of other hypnotists.
I think
sorry.
You're really honest. Sorry, finish your point. But I
No,
really
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think you're really honest. I actually think this is another thing that's going on. Like, this is one reason why this conference, we should say, Performing Hypnosis, a summit that anybody can attend online, is great. The reason why it's great is these are really interesting issues. There's a new trend, or I mean, it may have been there for a while, but you are part of it, sounds like, where stage hypnotists recognize if you're going to have people in deep trance, which we see as therapeutic and producing wellness, then why not make it positive? And this has happened, like another guy, Mark Lepine, does this. Kevin Lepine. Mark Lepine was a mass murderer. Kevin Lepine, hypnotist. So Kevin Lepine does it. At the end of it, he makes very positive suggestions, and you can say this to people too. That what you did in trance shows that an amazing part of your mind. I also point out when somebody becomes a chicken, I say, you should never take any of this personally, because that's what people are worried about. I'm going to reveal something about myself that's embarrassing. Well, no, what happens in trance is that everybody tends to be consistent. Like, if you're experiencing deep trance, you become a chicken, just like the other guy became a chicken and the other person. They all become a chicken roughly in the same way. They might do different things while they're a chicken, but the point is that not to feel that it's somehow personal. And two, you can take those deep states and you can make them healing. The people, isn't any reason why people can't come out feeling exhilarated, fantastic. And another thing is that people experience healings. You've probably had this, where somebody was like, I came in, I had a terrible backache, or I had a migraine or whatever, and then after the show, it's all gone. Well, I'm like, that's hypnosis.
So we're into the woods now. We're in the actual intellectual part of the conversation. This is my favorite part, because all of it is fluff before you get to the good stuff. So I do a skit. It's the pregnancy skit. And I do it in a motivational manner. Now, people always ask, well, how the hell can you do a pregnancy skit in a motivational manner? Well, I have a unicorn explode. Did you know unicorns breed by fungus? And they only breed with human males. So now that unicorn is bred with a human male, because the unicorn exploded, the male breathed it in, and now he's pregnant. And I go through the steps of pregnancy with the men in my stage. And then, so normal steps. You embrace your manly side, you have to yell, blah, blah, blah. You embrace your feminine side, and I want you to let out a feminine gasp and let out your feminine energy. That's a healing step right there. That's one healing step. The second healing step is that the men couldn't get it out because men are not equipped to actually give birth. Women are. So there you go. As their feminine side gives birth, they look down at their baby and they feel the love of a mother and what a mother would feel, and they realize what that love felt like for their mother as well, or for the women in their life that took care of them as a mother. Now, is it all fun? Not in any way, but there is an aspect at the end of it and throughout the whole skit, which is healing throughout. And I think that's something that most entertainers are missing. I think that part of what we do, there's a cosmic consciousness on what hypnosis is, a pre-perception on what we do. And I think a lot of hypnotists are failing by not actually tapping into it. When I first got into hypnosis, and I know you do instant inductions, but when I first got into hypnosis, instant inductions are such a big thing. Everybody's doing instants. And I saw that as a failure of the industry, because when I see a hypnosis show and when people in my area see a hypnosis show, they expect a 3 to 7 minute induction. And before I started, they actually expected like a 35-minute induction.
Yeah.
So if that's what they're expecting, are we not failing them by not giving them that? Like, I think there's a lot of discussion that we could have on the metaphysical is not the right word, but the other aspects of hypnosis other than just doing a show and having it be a funny show. There's mystery there. There's drama there. There's healing. And that's our job as entertainers, is to help the world heal, whether we believe it or not. I went on a rant.
But let me give you a funny example of this too, of like the common misunderstanding. I mean, it's amazing to be in hypnosis simply because, when you're in dentistry, nobody goes, "Is dentistry real? Is that is this fake?" But in hypnosis, people are like, they question everything, and there's still a widespread belief. I think it's stronger in America, but it's interesting place to place. In America, you have a lot of people like utterly convinced that it's fake. You also have people in Europe. It's more seen as like kind of esoteric and weird.
Yep.
And then in other places that are like it's right off the charts. But
in India, they have it. Some places have it where it's very popular, but it's not called hypnosis. It's just a state you go into in your daily life.
Yep.
Sorry for interrupting.
So, but I'll give you a funny example of where something that could happen, like why the hip-prov thing is interesting. So when I did my original TEDx, just like everyone who does like a TEDx and hypnosis, you get a bunch of hate mails saying, like, and it's out of the blue. You're like, what? You're like, they're saying you're a charlatan. It's fake. And you're like, what? Yeehaw. You're like, where do you come from? And what I was struck by with this is that I can see why when you see some of the behavior in stage hypnosis, there's a theatricality to it. And I've really looked at it carefully because I also, I should explain, I have training in improv. So I started wondering, I wondered that same thing, that I've noticed that people in trance can be good actors. So what's interesting about that is, one, you could do what hip-prov does, and any stage hypnotist could have an acting component, which they kind of do, but they could elevate it. Like they could say, let's play like these kind of acting games, and they would see, wow, these people are good. And it would let them kind of shine. The second thing is, as somebody who's done acting and I've been in that world, I know that good actors are also good hypnotic subjects, almost to the T. Like, meaning you say Brad Pitt, I'm like, guy is probably very hypnotizable. You say Jack Nicholson, very hypnotizable. It's very typical of good actors. Why? Because by definition, becoming somebody else, becoming the chicken, is an acting job.
Yes.
It doesn't mean it's fake. It means 100% commitment. That's what it means. So these things are not explored. There's never been a documentary looking at the relationship between acting and hypnosis. This would be a natural. There's a million. What I would love to do. One reason why I'm doing this documentary now is I'm like, I think there could be 10 great documentaries about hypnosis that would blow your mind. And I've talked to networks. I work in television, and I've talked to networks, and you can't do it. Well, maybe somebody will do it, but you can't do it because they don't understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They have no clue. And again, they wouldn't do the same thing to dentists. They wouldn't go, is this fake? But they don't actually have, and this is something that sort of I complain about in life. People lack curiosity. They're like, shouldn't you find out about this thing for yourself? I mean, it's about your unconscious mind. Wouldn't you want to know more?
I think about this all the time. We're at the very beginning of this. Yeah, it's been around for thousands of years. We didn't understand it as what we do now, but we're at the beginning of this.
I'm curious, why do you say that? Why? I feel that there's a renaissance going on now. I mean, it's come and gone many times, but there is a renaissance. Why is it happening?
The answer is because we're hypnotized more. I know in your TED Talk, you talk about we can't really be mass hypnotized in one of them. I fully disagree. I think the way that our politicians talk, how our information is delivered, and all aspects of propaganda, because we're in a propaganda machine, whether we know it or not. I think the Renaissance is part of the waking up to that propaganda and actually discovering for ourselves what's going on.
I like that.
I have to, yeah.
I should just clarify. I think what I said, I don't believe that people can't be mass hypnotized. I believe that you generally can't be hypnotized if you know it's happening, if you can see it coming and you hear the language or whatever. But yes, you can be hypnotized without knowing it's happening, I think. Yeah. And that could probably, you're right. It could happen to any, and you can be persuaded without it happening.
People don't like what I'm about to say. It's a very controversial topic. But if you hear a politician speak 3 words and then one other word, that's a hypnotic pattern break. That's really what, yes, we can. Make America great again. It's a slogan, and it's going into your head, and it is literal hypnotic language. And it doesn't matter the politician. If they're a high-level politician, Trudeau does it. Poilievre, or whatever the hell his name, does it. Trump, you damn right he does it. And Obama, and they all did. And it's part of their speechwriter's job to make that hypnotic language. And you said that if you don't know what's going on, you don't know what's going on. And that's the thing. Most people don't know what's going on. For the last year or so, I've been really looking at different areas of the world and their politics and the happiness of their people. And you see the different news feeds, and it's almost a completely different news feed for the world news in different countries. And as far as I'm concerned, that's propaganda. That's what that is. If you're having one section of people hearing one thing and another section of people hearing another, as far as real news, that's propaganda. Sorry for going on a rant.
No, I think you're wrong. There's something
mass hypnosis.
Can I tell you one really fascinating thing about this? So, I often say to people, again, so when people are like, ooh, hypnosis is an exotic state, meaning you need a hypnotist to do it. I'm like, no, hypnosis is occurring all the time. One of the biggest examples, and I've been big on this. I did a short on this just recently. I know one day I woke up in the morning. I've been trying to make this link for a while, because what I'm known for is connecting dreaming and trance states and hypnosis. But sometimes I'm like, it's hard for me to sort of like make that obvious to people. So I noticed this weird thing. One day I woke up and I realized I was sitting on the side of my bed, and I realized I'd been sitting there for 10 minutes staring at the floor. And I'm like, my God, what's wrong with me? And I realized, well, no, I'm basically in trance. then I thought, of course, well, why am I in trance? And I looked it up and I did a bit of research and I found out, well, this is a known phenomena. If you interrupt somebody, so if you, especially happens if you wake up by alarm clock, if you wake up naturally on your own, you won't do it as much. But if you wake up with an alarm clock, you will stare at stuff. You will go into trance. Why? Because you're still dreaming and you're still in the REM state aspect of trance. And this shows that there's a connection between REM state dreaming and hypnotic trance or trance behavior at minimum. So this is kind of mind-blowing to begin with, but then I would back up a little bit and say, so it shows that hypnosis is not that exotic. The other thing I would ask is, what is the first hypnotic induction? What is it? It's not, look at my pocket watch.
Nope.
It is storytelling around the fire.
Yeah.
Cavemen, women would get around the fire and they would tell stories. You have the fire there, which is itself hypnotic, flickering light, it's like an induction. And then you just have the story. And all you need to do to hypnotize people is to be a good storyteller. So that's why Trump literally is doing it all the time. Let me tell you a story. You can ask the question, if somebody says something and you say, could you put the words, let me tell you a story before that? Then it's kind of a hypnotic induction.
Mm-hmm.
And so storytelling is going on all the time, and people are masters of persuasive storytelling, politicians in particular.
Yeah.
And there's some rules to how to do it better than other things. So again, this perception that hypnosis is this rare, specific phenomena is false. But that's a very common thought.
Yeah.
It's really much more common than that.
If you want proof of how hypnosis works, and it's not just you, but the viewers. For those of you thinking the politicians don't use hypnosis, I'm going to bring up the big bad, Hitler. Okay? When he was using his speeches, he'd get people into what's known as a yes set. And make Germany great again. Yes. Make tanks. Yes. 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 And you get the audience chanting. There's a mass. It's like watching a boy band. All the little girls are, yeah. Well, that's what happened with Hitler. He was the original boy band, but everybody was yes, yes, yes. And eventually what happens is that once you're in the yes set, it's almost impossible to say no to the next thing that comes along. And that's hypnosis. That's why hypnotists get people to stand up, sit down. It also is church too. But anyone that's trying to get you to do a repeated action again and again, that's getting you into a yes set, whether it's a physical action, a mental action. Sales do it all the time. It's a yes set. And I always say on my stage, I can't prove hypnosis exists. But if you follow my suggestions, guess what? As far as I'm concerned, you're hypnotized. Because if you're following suggestions, how would I know the difference? You're hypnotized. Sounds weird and kind of metaphysical and kind of all over the place, but it's the truth. So that Hitler probably was one of the best hypnotists ever. Not in a good way, but probably one of the best ones ever.
And I think further to what you're saying is that I think you can arrive, and I think Trump might be an example, though Trump has trained, and is known, it's in books that he's trained in NLP and some probably methods of persuasion, but you can arrive at some of these things without training, meaning you just start noticing that you're more persuasive when you use hypnotic language, which is just using more visuals. Why? Because the unconscious mind is more visual. So you start noticing, boy, when I use those pictures of those people or describe certain things, it was much more effective than when I didn't. And then you gradually start moving to a hypnotic style of speaking.
So here's a great example. The speech where he said they're eating your pets.
Yes.
Up until that point, he was off the wall, but not really off the wall. But you talk about visuals. Well, I've got 2 dogs downstairs and a cat. And immediately my mind goes, when he says they're eating your pets, it goes to, holy shit, that's a horrible image in my head because I have a visual mind and I can actually see somebody eating my pets, which is a horrible thing. And your subconscious sees that when you're in hypnosis, whether you see it mentally or not, your subconscious is seeing that. It's like, holy crap. And of course people had a freak out about it.
And I know a bit of a background on that. There are studies, there's a research on this, that what Hitler did and what Trump does, let's be honest, what Hitler did and what Trump does is that if you use certain kind of language, so for example, if you use certain kinds of fear, it goes below the level of conscious thought. And for example, they're eating the dogs and their pets. Even this is another idea too. You might go, that's not true. You might go, that's not true. They're not eating the dogs and eating the pets. But because the image is in your brain, so it's like it's like a joke that if I said Jesse ate my dog, and we know that Jesse didn't eat your dog, but the picture's in your brain. I have a picture. I create a picture of Jesse, like Jesse cooked my dog and he ate it, and he ate it with Dijon mustard. Suddenly, and then Jesse walks in the door, even though I know it's bullshit.
Yep.
I still, the picture of Jesse putting Dijon mustard on my cooked dog is still there in my mind.
Yep.
That's hypnosis.
Yep. And the thing about this is, it's not just right now that we have been trained for that line to work specifically. I remember being a little kid, and I had some racist family members that would say, "Oh, those foreigners would eat the cat that was on the street," or whatever it was, right? And there's a large part of the population that has been, what is the hypnotic term?
When you
presupposed.
Or primed,
yes, yeah. Primed. There's a large part of the population that's been primed for that type of thing, and that's scary, because what else have they been primed for that would just take some words from a politician, any politician, not just Trump, any of them, to go flying off the deep end and starting a race war, or starting a war with another country for no reason, or taking over fucking Greenland.
Yeah. But even looking back to your line, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. What's also interesting about that is that one of the key aspects of propaganda is them, the othering of people. So there's these people that they're always up to something. They're always doing this, they're always doing that. They're bad.
In groups.
But another example is that if you talk about them and you make suggestions that they are particularly dirty. They are dirty. They do dirty things.
Yeah.
That crawls underneath consciousness, meaning even though I might try to judge them fairly, if they are kind of dirty and they have maybe diseases and they're eating the dogs and they're eating the cats, that will make me feel like they're a threat unconsciously. And whether I am open-minded or not, I will be threatened by them. Yeah. So this propaganda works. That's why people do it. Even though we're laughing at it, it works.
So I live in Saskatchewan, and I have friends of many different races, many different colors. And one of my friends, his name's Amin, and he's black. And I didn't realize it at first, but even he has been presupposed to this type of thing because he grew up in a different type of household than his culture. So he grew up in foster care. And because of that, he was predisposed towards racism towards his own people, which is crazy. So, and in Canada, we can talk about this a lot because we did have the 60s scoop go on. There are First Nations people in this country that are presupposed to be against First Nations. There's a lot of white people too, and I'm sure there's other races as well. But it is scary how well this propaganda has worked as far as the race stuff, and as far as even things, politics and churches and everything else. We won't get into the church thing because that's a real touchy subject for a lot of people. They can't believe that the church is hypnosis, but we'll leave that be.
I don't mind talking because I think it needs to be said. I mean, there's just some, just again, because why? Because it's often religious people who are the biggest opponents of hypnosis, and then they go to a church where they sit. Okay, so what are the sort of classic examples of what creates hypnotic effect? First one's eye fixation. So you sit in a pew and you stare at an altar, or you stare at a giant cross at the, where all the energy of the architecture is pointing at this one spot. Eye fixation. 2, boredom. So boredom is the lazy man's hypnosis. So you can hypnotize people by actually boring them. If they become bored, they start looking to fixate. So then somebody walks down the aisle, and what do? They wave a thing back and forth. Like, why does it have to be back and forth? The incense back and forth. And then another thing is they speak in monotonal, long-winded
Mhm.
speech. And those are all things that induce trance.
Yep.
Plus usually a story here or a story there. And yeah, there's no doubt that one of the reasons why why religious groups are hostile to hypnosis is because they use the same techniques. They just don't tell you.
Yeah. I find it extremely fascinating where hypnosis is used and where it isn't used. But then I look at my career and I have to be careful about the things I say because I know that it can be construed the wrong way. And that's my own personal hypnosis talking right there. So, Albert, this has been a fantastic conversation. We're 45 minutes in. We're at 2 o'clock. I'm assuming you're a busy, busy man, so I'm not going to take any more of your time. I would love to talk to you more about this at some point throughout the year. When your film comes out, message me. We'll get you back on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
Everybody, Albert Nerenberg, thank you so much. Performing Hypnosis Summit is what we're promoting. For those of you that watch this video, man, there's a lot of information there. We went into the woods kind of deep, and my chest hurts from it. But it's all good. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching Six Figure Entertainer. I'm Jesse Lewis. Have a great day, and I'll see you later.